Today in the EU, from abortion rights to assisted dying, Macron's 180 degrees shift. After France became the first country in the world to enshrine the right of women to have an abortion in the constitution, the country wants to now regulate assisted dying. The newfound focus on civil and social rights has convinced many that President Emmanuel Macron is trying to win back votes from the left in the run-up for the European elections. But how are European elections influencing Macron's choices? Hello and welcome. I am Evi Chiori and this is Today in the EU. We sat down with Clara Bauer-Babef, health and politics reporter of Euractiv France, to unravel this matter. Clara, before we dive into what are we discussing today, can you give us a bit of a background on how Emmanuel Macron's second term is going? Because we've had indeed seen a lot of action since he was re-elected, as he faced a lot of criticism on several fronts. How are things looking for him right now?
Well, for his second term, Macron has for sure this image of a more conservative president. And for example, something quite relevant is that now he's working with a government which has a majority of right-wing members. And I think the head of Foundation Jean Jaurès, which is an EU think tank, so the head of Jean Jaurès, Gilles Finkelstein, summarized it quite well because he said Renaissance, the party of Macron, has gone from a central party to a classic bourgeois and old center-right party. So Macron has really switched from a progressive and young president to a more right and conservative head of state.
And does this discontent manifest in the polls too?
Well, there is no clear link established, and we have to stay safe with polls. But I think it is super interesting to say that according to the recent polls, Macron has lost the votes of all the young people, so basically, let's say people under the 30s, when he first got elected, a big part of his support. So no more young people vote for Macron now, which is a big difference compared to 2017 when he was first elected. And again, the Fondation Jean Jaurès estimates that 20% of voters who voted for Macron in 2022 will now vote for a left-wing list in EU elections.
Clara, you closely follow the developments on the abortion enrichment in the Constitution. How was that received internally, and were there any fears of it being instrumentalized in that regard?
Yes. There has been a lot of fears because actually the idea of ensuring the abortion in the Constitution comes from feminist NGOs and progressive MPs, but it's not Macron's original idea, even though he supported it.
Inscrire dans notre Constitution la liberté garantie du recours à l'avortement pouvait sembler moins nécessaire voilà encore quelques années.
Said Emmanuel Macron during a speech on International Women's Day, admitting that inscribing abortion rights in the Constitution was indeed an urgency and a necessity, citing global setbacks and attacks on women's rights.
Also, his green light was necessary to change the Constitution. But that's it. It just gave green light to change the Constitution. It did not play a bigger role than this. It just agreed, and it all comes from MPs and feminist NGOs.
And now Macron is trying to legislate on the end of life, which is a first for the country. You did describe it in one of your articles as a French-style assisted dying bill. Can you briefly tell us what did you mean by that?
Yeah, so the future French law, actually, even though it looks progressive, will have a limited access to the end of life compared to other EU countries.
And what's the main difference?
For example, the main difference is that euthanasia, so basically when a doctor intentionally shortens a person's suffering, will be strictly forbidden. When euthanasia, for example, is legal in the Netherlands, in Spain, in Belgium, and in Luxembourg. And that is why a lot of people actually goes to this country when they want to have access to the end of life.
What does this law entail?
Well, I think the first thing is that the patient will have to be of legal age and capable of full discernment. But the problem is that this criterion, full of discernment, exclude patients, for example, suffering from Alzheimer or any other mental disorders, which is also a major difference with Belgium, because this is not the case in Belgium. And also the patient must be suffering from incurable disease with a short-term death. So this is not something a patient can take the decision ahead or at the beginning of the disease. And this is something that has been really criticized.
But this U-turn comes at a time that many have indeed found suspicious, because in recent months the government has approved several very conservative and contested measures. Can you break those measures down for us?
Sure. So I would say the two major conservative reforms lately in France, the first one was the pension reform, which is now more based on profits and look like a business model and is less protective in terms of social rights. And there has been a lot of demonstrations for months and months in France. Some of them has been super violent. So really the pension reform has been a tough one, and it has been a shock as well for a lot of people, because it used to be very protective in terms of social rights and pensions. And the second one is the immigration law, which is seen as racist from a lot of course, NGOs, but also, not only NGOs, but also MPs.
Jouir d'une avancée idéologique, d'une victoire même idéologique du Rassemblement national, puisque est inscrit maintenant dans cette loi la priorité nationale.
For Marine Le Pen, whose party voted in favor of it, the migration law text was a victory of her party's ideologies, something that really clashes with NGOs and other MEPs.
They said that this law does not protect migrants when they're in France, but the law only wants them to bring them back to the frontier, but not welcome them.
Another big U-turn that had consequences at a European level was indeed his change in stance regarding the notion of consent in the criminal definition of rape in the European Directive to combat violence against women. So what happened there?
So basically in February, there has been a directive to fight violence against women that has been adopted by member states. So it has been fully adopted, but there is one point that has been rejected, which is the notion of consent in the criminal definition of rape. And France was one of the countries fighting to do not include this definition.
Emmanuel Macron que le droit des femmes, ça se défend pas uniquement le 8 mars, et quand il bloque au niveau européen.
French MEP Manon Aubry called out Macron's conflicting stance on the definition of consent in criminal rape laws at the European level during a protest following the adoption of abortion rights in the constitution.
And 2 weeks ago, Macron said that in the end, he kind of changed his mind, and he's now in favor of having a definition of rape based on consent.
We see lots of instability in the political lines Macron used to follow. Has this anything to do with the fact that Renaissance and the Renew group are losing ground for the upcoming June elections? Is this change an attempt to maintain some popularity and power?
Well, for sure, there is a link between Renaissance worries about the polls. As you may know, this is actually the far-right Rassemblement National list, which is, for example, ahead of Renaissance with 30% of intention of vote. Renaissance is about 18% at the moment. But another element is that the list by Raphael Glucksmann, which is the socialist and the left-wing party in France, is gaining more and more votes in the polls and is now 13%. So we can also see it like this. The Progressive Party of Glucksmann is gaining votes, and at the same time, Macron's list is in favor of progressist and social measures in France. So all political experts say that it can be a strategy to win votes. And also remember, at the beginning, we said that Macron has lost all the votes from young people. And we know that this kind of measure, abortion in the constitution, the end of life, these are measures that are progressive and speak to young people.
Internally, there seems to be a change of heart in the preference of the young people.
Well, I think we should keep in mind that actually, even though Renaissance is the second party according to the polls and the intention of vote, we can say that more and more young people are moving to the Socialist Party led by Glucksmann. I think this is how you see also how politics is about strategy, because, for example, there is obviously this link with the abortion and the notion of consent, because Macron knows also exactly who he's addressing, which side of the voters he's addressing when he's putting himself in favor of progressist measures.
And do you see the strategy followed by him panning out well, or will it fizzle out?
No, I don't think so, because I think also something we have to keep in mind is that this is Macron's second term. So I think there is also this point of view where if Macron was a progressive president, we would know that for sure already.
That's true indeed. He's had lots of time to show his political line, I think.
And it's not because he has 3 years left that he can switch from 1 month to another, from conservative to progressive. I think people are also quite realistic about the timing and about the EU elections coming, and the fact that exactly at this moment, Macron is moving on social measures.
Thank you, Clara. It really is always interesting unpacking and comparing the internal politics and how they are reflected in the EU political stage. I am Evi Chiori, and this was Today in the EU. Visit Euractiv to stay top of the latest news, sign up for our podcast newsletter, and if you haven't subscribed yet, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever it is that you get your podcasts. This episode was produced by myself, Miriam Saez de Tejada, and Nicoleta Yonta. Thank you for tuning in, and we will be with you again tomorrow morning. As part of our commitment to accuracy, inclusion and transparency, Euractiv is part of the Trust Project.